Welcome to the Fabulous 413. I'm Khalees Smith.
And I'm Monte Belmonte. It's Jewish Book Month.
Which we both thought was a week, but we're proven wrong.
It was a week, but I think it's been extended into a month. But Indeed. Our next guest has not one, not two, but, well, 2 books that essentially double down on the celebration, but 4 books this year, as we were learning in the green room, if we're keeping a tally.
2 books released in the past, basically, month.
Yeah, or
gearing up for Jewish Book Month.
Yes, and one of those books...
That's why they had to expand it from a week to a month.
I know, you have to have it
I'm trying to keep busy.
You have one book per week for each of the months.
It's the Hanukkah of books where the oil just get extended and extended over 8 days all of a sudden. Now there's going to be 8 books. One of those books, though, is What Louis Brandeis Knows, an illustrated biography of the life of the first Jewish member of the Supreme Court.
And the other is Fanny's Big Idea, which looks at how Fanny Goldstein created Jewish Book Week through her work at the Boston Public Library. Both of these books were written by our next guest.
Rich Michelson from Northampton's many books for children, for teens, and adults have been listed among the 10 best of the year by the New York Times, Publishers Weekly, and the New Yorker. He's received a National Jewish Book Award and 2 Sidney Taylor Gold Medals from the Association of Jewish Libraries.
And in 2019, he became the 6th recipient of the Samuel Minot Jones Award for Lifetime Literary Achievement. And he's also the former Poet Laureate of Northampton, because not just a children's book author, but also a poet.
And a gallery owner behind the R. Michelson Gallery right there on Main Street in Northampton that has so many great... it feels like a museum, but you can purchase the stuff.
You can, yes.
Shouldn't most galleries? Isn't that
we
true?
encourage
most
that.
Yes. Rich, let's start with your Louis Brandeis book, because everybody's talking about the Supreme Court, and Louis Brandeis was the first non-white Christian member of the Supreme Court.
Yeah, unbelievable.
Yeah.
And we could sure use him on the court today. It's amazing. You know, reading all his, I spent a year kind of reading all his letters, his decisions for the Supreme Court. And he was so prescient about what we had to guard against, and how the Supreme Court could help shape as an independent branch by itself, not working for the other branch or the president. So many things that he started that we take for granted today that are suddenly not taken for granted. It's because of Brandeis that we have the 8-hour workday, not a 12 to 15-hour workday. It's because of Brandeis that lawyers do pro bono work. Before his doing that, he felt that nobody who had a case for social justice should be turned away. So he started taking cases and working for free. That was unheard of before Brandeis, and he is rolling over in his grave. It would have never occurred to him that pro bono work would be done for those in power. The whole point of it was to do pro bono work for those who could not afford it. He is the first lawyer who was willing to call the president a liar. And at the time, that was not done. It was just people. He was called ungentlemanly for doing that because presidents don't lie. But he caught Taft in a blatant lie, selling wild lands to mining companies, while he was at the same time telling the public that he was preserving those lands.
There's a book
he
review.
He was preserving them for the coal companies.
Yes,
yeah.
There is a book review, and I can't tell from it's from Momentum Ag. Oh no, Moment Mag, which Momentum Ag is totally different. This is what I believe you wrote for them. In 2010, a relatively unknown Boston lawyer named Louis Brandeis accused President William Taft of participating in a cover-up. Taft had allowed his Secretary of the Interior, Richard Ballinger, to engage in a corrupt backroom deal to sell mining rights to the same public recreation lands Taft had promised to protect. Brandeis, representing a government whistleblower, was excoriated in Congress for being ungentlemanly, unsportsmanlike, and just plain rude. It was considered bad manners for any lawyer, not to mention a Jewish one, to cast doubt on a president's honesty. But this is sort of what puts him on the map with the following president, right, Wilson,
Yes.
who will eventually appoint him to the Supreme Court.
And again, it was the first contentious Supreme Court nomination. Of course, before that, everybody was white, Christian, and male.
Right.
So it was like a old boys club. But it was contentious. There was blatant anti-Semitism. He was called a muckraker. He was, he had gone after the powers that be, and the powers that did not want him on the court. But this was a case, and we can learn from this, where it looked like there was no way he was going to get onto the court. The Justice Department didn't want him. The politicians didn't want him. The moneyed people didn't want him. But the citizens that he had spent his career, working for, started writing letters to their Congress people. And eventually, the push behind him was so great that he was confirmed. So people rose up, people refused to be quiet, and they gathered together and they were able to make that change. And that is just, something that we have to keep fighting. We have to keep raising our voices. And, it's difficult. He in so many ways, he was prescient. He said that we have a choice in this country. We can have wealth by the very few, or we can have democracy, but we can't have both. And this was this was during the time of the robber barons, the first Gilded Age, and he was there.
The original Gatsby parties at Mar-a-Lago.
The original Gatsby parties, yeah. So pretty amazing.
And we're speaking with Rich Michelson, whose new book for kids is called What Louis Brandeis Knows, but it's great for grown-ups, too, who may not be familiar with this first non-white male Supreme Court Justice, Louis Brandeis.
In fact, I have questions, as I always do, about your illustrations, because, the pictures in any picture book are, going to draw the attention, and the ones in this book are of an interesting ilk. So talk about the illustrations and working with your illustrator.
Okay, so this is Stacy Erst. He's a very well-known illustrator. So what most people don't understand is that I have absolutely no say over who illustrates my books.
Despite all of them having work in your gallery on Main Street in Northampton.
So in general, hold on. So that comes after, you see, because I would never ask one of the illustrators that I represent to illustrate one of my books, because it puts them in an awkward position.
Right.
They can't say no. I mean,
Right.
I'm paying them, right?
Yeah.
So I would never do that. But oftentimes, after we're done working together, we get to know each other, and then, of course, if possible, and I have space, we're happy to invite them into the gallery. I've been very fortunate because I have amazing illustrators. This book was actually sold 5-6 years ago, and the other book, Fanny's Big Idea, was sold a year ago, and they're both out the same month. It's a crazy business. It's a crazy business. But in this case, I waited for Stacy, who had other projects and he needed to do, but he's just perfect for this. He's just perfect. The subtitle of the book is A Crusader for Social Justice Becomes a Supreme Court Justice, and there on the cover, Stacy turned those Supreme Court black robes into a superhero cape.
Nice.
So, it's just brilliant.
We're speaking about Louis Brandeis in the book What Louis Brandeis Knows with Rich Michelson, who is the author behind it. One question before we let Louis Brandeis go and go on to your other book that was released in the last month that ties into Jewish Book Week / Jewish Book Month. There's a refrain that shows up over and over again in the Louis Brandeis book, "Any fool knows," and it sounds like his father at the beginning of the book when Louis is a young man being instructed by his father, but he takes it forward into his own world as a Supreme Court justice. Trying to lay out kind of the golden rule almost is what it sounds like to. But was this a real refrain that was part of Louis Brandeis's life and work? Any fool knows?
Yeah. So I was fortunate. I read all his letters, but of course they're in German. I didn't read them in German. I should say that. But it did give me the ability to do my own translation. of what basically was said, which was any fool knows that one person doesn't have the ability, doesn't have the right to own another person. Any fool knows that you should be treated equally, regardless of your race, your religion. This is the family that Brandeis grew up in, and I don't know, I don't speak German, I don't know what his father said in the German language, but I was able to translate it in that. In his letters, I think it was a little less that phrase.
Yeah.
But then I was fortunate to find that in one of his letters, Brandeis did say, any fool knows this is the way things should be. And so that became a reframe. The book actually was in manuscript titled "What Any Fool Knows," but my publishers, who were smarter than I, decided to change it to "What Louis Brandeis Knows," because algorithms and book selling and things like that. A book just called "Any Fool Knows," you don't know what it's about.
It could be "What a Fool Believes."
Yeah,
Michael McDonald.
No, that's.
Your other book, Rich Michelson, that's out just recently, has to do with how Jewish Book Week, which is now Jewish Book Month because of your 4 books, I guess,
and many other things.
How it was born. Fanny's, and both of these take place in Massachusetts. Louis Brandeis was at Harvard, so a lot of his story takes place in Massachusetts, as does Fanny's.
In fact, to have him graduate on time as opposed to waiting until he was 21, as was the law at Harvard when he was there.
Yeah, we learned a lot from your children's book about Louis Brandeis and about Harvard. But talk about Fanny's big idea. Who was Fanny, and how did what she do lead to what is now Jewish Book Week and Jewish Book Month?
So, so this is, as you said, the 100th anniversary of Jewish Book Month. It starts November 13th and runs through December 13th. It's, the Jewish months don't line up necessarily with our calendar months. But Fanny was an immigrant, and the first Jewish librarian to run a branch library. She came over to this country, and she could not believe that in this country, this was the most amazing thing to her, you could go to a library and read a book for free.
Yeah.
This was absolutely amazing. And this just blew her away, basically. So she would go to weekly meetings at one of the settlement houses, where you learned how to be American. You learned the customs, you learned this and that, the history. She was taught often by students from Harvard who would be teaching the immigrants, students from Simmons College who would be teaching the immigrants, and they would tell her all about American customs, and then she would try to tell them about Jewish customs or customs from the old country, and she was never understood why they didn't seem to be interested. They just wanted her to be American. That's how that generation of immigrants grew up. It's often the case. You're brought up to be American as a child. Even I was, in a sense. I wasn't brought up with any knowledge of my grandparents, my history, the Jewish history. I was brought up to learn to play baseball and be American. And I realized at one point later on, which led to a lot of my books, that I considered myself a well-educated person. I could, tell you the Russian writers, the kings and queens of England. I didn't know where my own grandparents came from. Mm-hmm. I really didn't. And what Fanny realized in the library is that the books that would be taken out by the young children were often the good old American books, which she loved, our myths, our histories, but nobody was taking out books about their own cultures. Not only the Jewish people, later blacks moved from down south. She added black authors. When Chinese people moved into Boston, she ordered Chinese authors. She felt she was the original proponent of what has become to be known as the mirrors and windows function of books, which means that every child has the right to see themselves in books. And also, they have the ability to learn about others. So that's the windows and mirrors. And she realized at that point that the children were not taking out books of their own culture, and adults weren't either. So she decided that she would, 100 years ago, put out a table with books by and about Jews for the Jewish people to start to relearn about their culture. Later, she also started Negro Book Week, Catholic Book Week, and Boston Red Sox Book Week. I'm not kidding you. She did.
How many books are there about the
there's
Boston Red Sox?
There's a lot now, and there probably was then,
right,
too.
But let me say that hasn't lasted 100 years.
Okay.
It lasted 86 years. Now we can get a new Boston Red Sox Book Week.
Nope.
So she wanted to prove that immigrants were as smart as native United States citizens. She wanted to prove that everybody could live together. And the refrain in that book, as I try to put a refrain in each book, is that the more you know about someone's life, the harder it is not to like them. And that is how she lived her life. She was important for librarians, for Jews. She also was in the forefront of women's liberation and suffrage. She refused, once she got well known and was asked to speak at various places around, she refused to speak unless she got paid the same amount that men were getting paid to speak in the same things. If she was on a panel, which she often was, and there were 9 men and herself, she would have ready to say, here are some other women speakers who should be invited on as well. So she didn't take nonsense from anybody. She spoke her mind. She was a feisty, tough woman. You read her letters, you got to love her, and you're also glad that you're not challenging her about anything.
Yeah, she could have given Louis Brandeis a run for his money, maybe, as a lawyer.
She reminded me of some of my old Jewish aunts. She said the way this is how things are. She did not have children. She was never married, but every person who walked into the library was her child. She wanted to get to know people, and she became a Boston area, basically the Globe did a story on her, I think 90 years ago, talking about how she has made the library a center for immigrants to come, to learn, to get to know each other. The library was their home away from home.
And we are talking about Fanny Goldstein, who you can read about in a new book for kids, Fanny's Big Idea, alongside, go to your library and get it out, because she's one of the creators of Jewish Book Week and Jewish Book Month,
right.
along with Rich Michelson.
Buy it.
Or buy it, for Rich Michelson's sake, along with the book What Louis Brandeis Knows. 2 new books by Rich Michelson just out this past month in anticipation of Jewish Book Week and now Jewish Book Month. Rich Michelson from the R. Michelson Galleries, author, poet. Thank you so much for joining us here today.
Thank you. Always a pleasure to be here.
This happens to be Dylan at Brandeis University.
Later in the show, we'll learn about the multi-genre, multi-faith concert Yearnings happening at Bombyx in Florence this Thursday.
But first, the middle of a science and pop culture diagram is the topic from Mr. Universe this week, complete with Kardashians in tow.
You're listening to the Fabulous 413 on 88.5 NEPM.
I want you to know I can see through your mask.